This year marks the centenary of the opening of the Second Chinese Revolution. It erupted in May 1925, fueled by the slave-like conditions facing workers. Strikes were met by brutal repression. The immediate trigger was the murder of a worker by a Japanese foreman in Shanghai. Anti-imperialist protests by students and workers throughout the city spread nationally after British police on May the 30th fired on thousands of protesters, killing 12. In response, the entire city was paralysed by a general strike. Throughout the country, around 400,000 workers took part in some 135 strikes. And the opposition continued to grow when British and French troops opened fire with machine guns on a large protest in Canton on June 23. 100,000 workers left the nearby British colony of Hong Kong, and a boycott of British goods was declared under the direction of a Canton, Hong Kong strike committee. These events were the start of a powerful revolutionary movement that was to embrace millions of workers and peasants across China over the next 2 years. The devastating defeat of the revolution in 1927, as a direct consequence of Stalin's policies, was a major strategic experience of the international working class and a critical turning point in the political consolidation of the left opposition. The first lecture demonstrated why Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution proved to be the fundamental basis for the victory of the Bolsheviks in October 1917. The tragic outcome of the Second Chinese Revolution was a second confirmation of permanent revolution, but in the negative. The Stalinist perspective of socialism in one country and the rejection of socialist internationalism had as its corollary the revival of the Menshevik two-stage theory, which assigned to the so-called national bourgeoisie in China the leading role in the bourgeois national revolution. Stalin exploited the authority of the Russian Revolution to foist it on the young Communist Party and subordinate it to the Nationalist Party of the Chinese bourgeoisie, the Kuomintang. Stalin claimed in China imperialist oppression had welded anti-imperialist forces together into a bloc of four classes: the national bourgeoisie, the proletariat, the peasantry, and the petty bourgeoisie that would carry out the revolution. The Kuomintang would lead the revolution, while the Communist Party was to be its loyal political servant. Nothing could be done to threaten capitalist property relations, and thus the bloc of four classes. The fight for socialism was relegated to a distant second stage. Drawing on the theory of permanent revolution and the experiences of the Russian Revolution, Trotsky explained, far from welding the classes together, the development of the revolution would inevitably lead to a confrontation between the working class and the bourgeoisie. He insisted that the Communist Party had to establish its political independence from the Kuomintang and fight for the leadership of and develop the revolutionary movement of workers and peasants by calling for the formation of Soviets, which Stalin repeatedly opposed. As Comrade Chris has already explained, in the wake of the defeat of the revolution in Germany in October 1923, the Stalinist clique sought to cover up its own responsibility by promoting a radically false assessment of the world situation as one of permanent revolutionary possibilities ahead, rather than of revolutionary ebb. This ultra-leftism led to failed adventures and also given a temporary acquiescence in the working class and orientation to other class forces. What Trotsky termed in the Third International after Lenin, the right Levin of this ultra-leftism was to emerge later, with the belated recognition of a relative economic stabilisation of capitalism. This emerged in a lurch to the right. The right centrist downsliding, which produced the defeat of the British general strike, also led to the opportunist embrace of the Kuomintang in China. It's not possible in the space of time available to give a blow-by-blow account of the Chinese Revolution as it unfolded over 2 years. For those who want to make a study, I recommend The Tragedy of the Chinese Revolution by Harold Isaacs, for which Trotsky wrote an important introduction. The book has stood the test of time despite Isaacs' later sharp turn to the right, and is an important companion to the crucial writings and polemics of Trotsky at the time. The Chinese Revolution is not simply an interesting history lesson. The political ramifications reverberate down to the present, not just in China, where the 1949 or Third Chinese Revolution was deformed by the Maoist version of socialism in one country. The Menshevik formulae codified and sanctified by Stalinism in China, the two-stage theory, the bloc of four classes, and the glorification of the so-called progressive national bourgeoisie have been responsible for the defeat after defeat of the working class in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America in the century that followed. I've just put up the map of China as it was in the 1920s, marking out key cities which were part of the revolutionary upheaval. It's important to bear those in mind as I go through the lecture. I just make the point that the names that I've used for the cities are the names as they were at the time and appear in the writings of Trotsky and other writings of that time, rather than the present names. In the time available in this lecture, it is only possible to outline the major turning points and political lessons of the Second Chinese Revolution over the 2 years from May-June 1925 to December 1927. Some background is necessary. China in the 1920s was a fractured, semi-colonial country. The major imperialist powers, Britain chief among them, had imposed unequal treaties on the tottering Manchu dynasty through gunboat diplomacy. Each of them had carved out enclaves or concessions in cities like Shanghai, where their rule and police prevailed. The Manchu dynasty was overthrown in the First Chinese Revolution of 1911. But the weakness of the Chinese bourgeoisie was exemplified by the inability of the new republic's first president, Sun Yat-sen, to unify the country, which was carved up between rival warlords. His party, the Chinese National Party, or Kuomintang, controlled only the southern city of Canton and immediate environs. Its very weakness was why Sun Yat-sen had turned to the Soviet Union for aid and assistance in forging a military. In 1924, Soviet advisors helped establish the Whampoa Military Academy, headed by Chiang Kai-shek. The Chinese Communist Party had been established in 1921, just 4 years prior to the outbreak of the revolution. In August 1922, the Comintern directed the young Communist Party to join the Kuomintang as individual members and work within its ranks. It was not until the following year, because of widespread opposition in the Chinese Communist Party, that it was finally prevailed upon to do so. When the question was discussed in the CPSU Politburo in Moscow in January 1923, Trotsky was alone in opposing the decision. Far from being a temporary step towards building an independent party, under Stalin, it became a long-term policy as he embraced the Kuomintang as the leader of the Chinese Revolution. Despite its subordination to the Kuomintang, the Communist Party gained considerable influence in the working class. On May Day 1925, that is, on the eve of the revolution, the Communist Party's Second National Labour Congress convened organisations that represented some 570,000 workers. The death of Sun Yat-sen in March 1925 had provoked factional infighting within the Kuomintang between Chiang Kai-shek, its military commander and head of the Whampoa Military Academy, and the nominal left Wang Ching-wei, who headed the party and its government in Canton. That culminated a year later in a March 1926 coup in which Chiang Kai-shek seized control of the Kuomintang. He ousted the left leadership, at the same time moved against the Communist Party and the working class. Chiang also contained 50 prominent communist leaders and placed all Soviet advisors under arrest. Communists were henceforth barred from leading positions and committees within the Kuomintang and were forced to advocate the bourgeois liberal ideology of Sun Yat-sen. The internal crackdown was mirrored by repression against strikes by workers and action by the peasantry. The long-running Canton-Hong Kong strike was shut down in October 1926. Having consolidated his grip over the Kuomintang, Chiang launched a military campaign in July 1926, the Northern Expedition, against the northern warlords in a bid to extend the Kuomintang rule throughout China. What was Stalin's response? He instructed the Communist Party to remain inside the Kuomintang despite being politically and organisationally bound hand and foot, and ordered it to assist the Northern Expedition in every way. For the masses, the Kuomintang's military victories were seen as the beginning of the revolution. When Hunan province was liberated from the warlords, for instance, 4 million farmers flooded into peasant associations in just 5 months, and 500,000 workers joined the Communist Party-led General Labour Union. Chiang relied heavily on the Communist Party to channel this huge movement behind the Kuomintang. In the Soviet Union, Trotsky and the left opposition demanded the political independence of the Communist Party from the Kuomintang and warned of the consequences, despite increasing censorship, provocations, and repression by the Stalinist apparatus. Trotsky wrote in September 1926 that the rise of a mighty strike wave amongst Chinese workers meant that the immediate political task facing the Communist Party must now, quote unquote, must now be to fight the direct independent leadership of the awakened working class. He warned, the leftward movement of the masses of Chinese workers is as certain a fact as the right-wing movement of the Chinese bourgeoisie. Insofar as the Kuomintang has been based on the political and organisational union of the workers and the bourgeoisie, it must now be torn apart by centrifugal forces of the class struggle. Stalin, however, continued to promote Chiang and the Kuomintang as the leadership of the Chinese Revolution. In March 1926, the Comintern had formally included the Kuomintang, that is, a bourgeois party, as a sympathising section of the Comintern, and put Chiang on its presidium as an honorary chairman. Stalin dismissed mounting signs that Chiang was preparing to crack down on the Communist Party and continued to insist that nothing be done to jeopardize the relationship with the Kuomintang. As a result, the Communist Party was barred from forming Soviets of workers and peasants, even though they were gravitating towards their establishment. In March 1927, after Chiang's armies had seized Nanking, the Communist Party organised an armed insurrection in Shanghai, China's most industrialised city, backed by a general strike of 800,000 workers, which crushed the warlord forces. Under the aegis of the city's General Labour Union, it took total control of the city, except for the foreign concessions, terrifying the bourgeoisie. In what became an increasingly open secret, Chiang conspired with the city's businessmen and gangsters to deliver a deadly blow against the Shanghai proletariat and the Communist Party. Stalin, however, ordered the Communist Party to bury its arms and to welcome Chiang's troops into the city. In a notorious speech in the Hall of Columns in Moscow on April the 5th, 1927, which to my knowledge at least has never been published in English, Stalin declared, "Chiang is submitting to discipline. The Kuomintang is a bloc, a sort of revolutionary parliament, with the right, the left, and the communists. Why make a coup d'etat? Why drive away the right when we have the majority and when the right listens to us? They have to be utilised to the end, squeezed out like a lemon, and then flung aside." Just 1 week later, on April the 12th, 1927, it was Chiang who flung the Communist Party aside and unleashed a bloodbath. A general strike was answered with bullets. Hundreds of workers and communists were savagely butchered, and the city's Communist Party and General Labour Union shattered. In the reign of white terror that followed, thousands of communist workers were murdered in Shanghai and other cities under Chiang's control. In the wake of this monumental disaster, in Moscow, on April the 21st, Pravda published Stalin's thesis on the problems of the Chinese Revolution, in which he declared that the events, quote unquote, proved that the line laid down was the correct line. Trotsky wrote a devastating reply, The Chinese Revolution and the Theses of Comrade Stalin, in which he refuted point by point the justifications for the betrayal of the Chinese working class. It was not published, certainly not published at the time. To Stalin's claim that imperialist oppression yoked together the proletariat with the national bourgeoisie in a bloc of 4 classes, with the peasantry and the urban petty bourgeoisie, Trotsky wrote the following: "It is a gross mistake to think that imperialism mechanically welds together all the classes of China from without. The revolutionary struggle against imperialism does not weaken, but rather strengthens the political differentiation of the classes. Everything that brings together the oppressed and exploited masses of the toilers to their feet inevitably pushes the national bourgeoisie into an open bloc with the imperialists. The class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the masses of workers and peasants is not weakened, but on the contrary is sharpened by imperialist oppression to the point of bloody civil war at every major conflict. A further justification for the claim that the national bourgeoisie in China would play a revolutionary role was the supposed dominance of remnants of feudalism. But as Trotsky explained, what predominated in China were capitalist relations, which reached into every aspect of society. The hated moneylender in the village is linked with finance capital in the city, a nexus that would only be ended through a revolutionary movement of the working class supported by the peasantry against the bourgeoisie. As Stalin prepared a second edition of the tragedy by subordinating the Communist Party, this time to the left Kuomintang based in Wuhan, he declared again that the time was not right for the formation of Soviets. The creation of Soviets, he said, would mean an insurrection against the revolutionary Kuomintang, that is the lefts in Wuhan. Trotsky explained that despite the Shanghai massacre, all the signs were that the revolution had not yet been crushed. Soviets were the essential means through which the millions of workers and peasants could organise the revolutionary struggle and met up with the experience of the masses. He wrote the following: "The Chinese peasant knows that the Soviets gave the land to the Russian peasant. The Chinese workers know the Soviets guaranteed the liberty of the Russian proletariat. The experience of the counter-revolution of Chiang Kai-shek must have made the advanced workers understand that without an independent organisation embracing the whole proletariat and assuring its collaboration with the oppressed masses of the city and the land, the revolution cannot triumph." The left Kuomintang, Stalin argued, still represented the revolutionary petty bourgeoisie, who would lead the agrarian revolution in the second stage of the revolution. Yet, left Kuomintang military leaders were already ignoring official party policy and carrying out bloody attacks on communists, trade unions, and peasants' associations in the region. Rather than condemn the attacks, Stalin denounced the left opposition's call for Soviets as amounting to a call for the overthrow of the left Kuomintang government of Wang Qingwei. In a speech to the 8th plenum of the Comintern in May 1927, Trotsky warned, "We say directly to Chinese peasants, the leaders of the left Kuomintang of the type of Wang Qingwei and company will inevitably betray you if you follow the Wuhan heads instead of forming your own independent Soviets. Politicians of the Wang Qingwei type under difficult conditions will unite 10 times with Chiang Kai-shek against the workers and peasants. The Chinese bourgeois democratic revolution will go forward and be victorious either in the Soviet form or not at all." Stalin, however, ordered the Communist Party to remain with the left Kuomintang. Communist leaders held 2 key ministerial posts for agriculture and labour in the bourgeois government. Amid the continuing rise of revolutionary struggles, Wang Qingwei insisted they use their influence to curb the excessive actions of the peasants and workers. In many rural areas, peasant associations had driven out the landlords and were functioning as the left authority. In 2 major cities, Wuhan and Changsha, workers hard hit by inflation and business closures raised demands for the takeover of factories and shops. 2 months later, Trotsky's warnings proved tragically correct. On July 15th, Wang Qingwei ordered all communists to leave the Kuomintang or face severe punishment. Like Chiang Kai-shek, it was Wang who squeezed the Communist Party like a lemon and cast it aside. The wave of terror unleashed against communists, peasants and workers was, if anything, more brutal and widespread than that of Chiang. The peasant and labour unions of Henan were completely smashed. N.M. Roy, the chief Comintern delegate to the Kuomintang, whose chief concern was to cover up the extent of the defeat, estimated that 25,000 communists were killed at the hands of Chiang and Wang in the first half of 1927, along with many more workers and peasants. Once again, Stalin declared that his political line had been correct and blamed Chinese Communist Party leader Chen Duxiu for the disaster. In the wake of two catastrophic defeats inflicted on the Communist Party, the working class and oppressed masses, Stalin ordered an abrupt about-face, paralleling the ultra-leftism that immediately followed the defeat of the German Revolution in 1923. Right at the point when the revolutionary tide was receding, the Chinese Communist Party was forced to embark on a series of failed adventures culminating in December 1927 in the order to establish a Soviet in Canton and seize power. It was time to coincide not with any revolutionary upsurge in Canton, but with the opening of the 15th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and designed to fend off the criticisms of the left opposition. The Chinese Communist Party waged a courageous struggle over 3 days, from December the 11th to the 13th, although greatly outnumbered and outgunned, to establish control of key buildings in Canton and issued a bold manifesto that foreshadowed deep inroads into capitalist property relations. But there was not a rising mass movement or basis for an elected Soviet, and little prospect of support from elsewhere, even if the uprising was successful. Few workers responded to the appeals for mass meetings. No call for a general strike was made. The Kuomintang rapidly mobilised its military forces to crush the rebellion with savage brutality, marking the end of the revolution. Even in its defeat, however, Trotsky drew vital political lessons from the Canton Commune, or Soviet, which was testament to the fact that the proletariat alone was capable of carrying out the task as the leadership of the bourgeois democratic revolution, and in doing so would be compelled to begin socialist reconstruction of society. As Trotsky explained, the program of the new state power consisted not only in the confiscation of whatever feudal estates there may be in Guangdong in general, not only the establishment of workers' control of production, but also in the nationalisation of big industry, banks and transportation, and even the confiscation of bourgeois dwellings and all bourgeois property for the benefit of the toilers. The question arises, if these are the methods of a bourgeois revolution, then what would the proletarian revolution in China look like? In the opening section of the Third International after Lenin, devoted to the Chinese Revolution, Trotsky wrote, "Bolshevism and Menshevism and the left wing of German and international social democracy took definite shape on the analysis of the experiences, mistakes, and tendencies of the 1905 revolution. An analysis of the experiences of the Chinese Revolution is today of no less importance for the international proletariat. In the course of the inner party struggle, 1925 to 27, the unbridgeable gulf between Bolshevism and Menshevism had been redrawn in the new form in its struggle of the left opposition against the policies of Stalin, which had been proven to be a disaster. The theory of permanent revolution had been furnished with new proof, but at a terrible cost. And as Trotsky warned, although the left opposition had won thousands of new adherents, Stalin would exploit the defeat and its impact on the Soviet working class to intensify its repression. At the 15th Congress, the left opposition was expelled from the party and its leaders, including Trotsky, sent into internal exile. At the same time, Trotsky's writings on China clarified the reasons for the devastating defeat, laying the basis for the formation of the Chinese left opposition. Amongst those who joined its ranks were former members and leaders of the Communist Party, including its founding chairman, Chen Tu-tsiu, along with hundreds of Chinese students who had been won to the left opposition while studying in Moscow. Thank you.